different section of the border, a place where Americans and Mexicans have come together for years while remaining within their respective countries, could soon be no more.
To Mexicali, causing both sides of the border to be closed.
The scorching midday sun beat down on the rugged terrain where California meets Mexico, casting long shadows over the jagged canyons and brush-strewn paths near the border. For decades, this region had been the site of persistent border tensions, smuggling attempts, and covert crossings. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared federal agents for what they unearthed beneath the cracked soil just miles from San Diego. What began as a routine patrol turned into an extraordinary discovery that would ripple through law enforcement agencies, national security apparatus, and the halls of government in Washington, D.C. Within 24 hours, the United States government had taken the unprecedented step of shutting down a major portion of the California border, not due to illegal crossings or political brinkmanship, but because of a terrifying underground find that shook the very foundations of Homeland Security. Before we start, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more updates. It all started when ground sensors installed by Customs and Border Protection began transmitting erratic pulsing data, anomalous vibrations from beneath the earth, stronger and more rhythmic than the typical signs of burrowing activity or natural movement. Initially dismissed as a mechanical malfunction, the signals persisted, gaining strength and frequency over the next few days. Eventually, a specialized border task force was dispatched to investigate. Armed with ground-penetrating radar and subterranean drones, they focused on a particularly active section near Otay Mesa, a border region long associated with smuggling tunnels used by criminal cartels. What they discovered went far beyond anything they had anticipated. About 30 feet underground, beneath a seemingly abandoned storage facility, agents discovered an elaborate tunnel system. But this was no ordinary smuggling passage. It was deeper, wider, and more structurally reinforced than anything ever found in North America. Steel beams lined the curved interior. LED lights ran in precise intervals along the tunnel ceiling. Fiber optic cables snaked along the sides, suggesting not just a passageway but a well-connected network of communications. What was even more baffling was the presence of industrial-grade ventilation systems, fresh food containers, military-grade generators, and evidence of recent human occupation. Beds, uniforms, maps, everything was pristine. This wasn't a tunnel built for crude operations. This was something more ominous. The most disturbing find lay deeper inside, an underground chamber locked behind a biometric security door. After gaining access, agents were greeted with a sight that veered sharply into the surreal. The chamber held what looked like a command center. Large screens lining the walls, control panels embedded with encrypted interfaces, and surveillance feeds from multiple border checkpoints. Dozens of high-resolution camera streams showed real-time movements of patrol vehicles, drone positions, and even thermal imaging overlays from security satellites. This wasn't just surveillance, it was infiltration. Someone, or some group, had created a secret underground facility capable of monitoring and possibly even disrupting border operations in real time. With adrenaline surging and urgency mounting, the discovery triggered a full-scale lockdown. Military police were deployed, the Federal Emergency Management Agency was placed on high alert, and top-tier cyber intelligence officers from the NSA and Homeland Security flew in overnight. Within hours, all traffic across a broad swath of the California border, from Tecate to Calexico, was halted. Ports of entry were sealed, civilian access was restricted, thousands of travelers were turned back or rerouted. Commercial shipping lanes came to a grinding halt. Entire communities near the border found themselves under emergency alert status. The government's official stance was vague. Ongoing security operations, but within the chain of command, the threat was clear. The border was compromised from within. The implications were staggering. If such a facility could exist undetected for what could have been months or even years, what else was hidden beneath the nation's borders? How had a tunnel of this complexity escaped notice despite years of sensor deployments and satellite surveillance? More importantly, who built it and for what purpose? Theories spread like wildfire. Some within the intelligence community suspected a rogue state's involvement. an effort to establish a covert base of operations on American soil. Others feared a homegrown extremist faction with the funding and technical skills to engineer such a complex subterranean network. Still more disturbing was the idea that this might be the tip of the iceberg, and that other, more dangerous facilities might exist along the thousands of miles of America's southern boundary. Complicating the situation further was the fact that the tunnel didn't begin in Mexico as most had assumed. In fact, forensic geologists determined that its origin point might have been well within U.S. borders, stretching eastward from a location still undisclosed to the public. If true, this meant that the operation was not a foreign incursion, but a domestic conspiracy, funded, organized, and executed by individuals already inside the United States. That revelation sent shockwaves through Washington. Within closed-door briefings at the Capitol, lawmakers were briefed on the possibility that federal contractors or even former military engineers could have been involved in its construction. The quality of the workmanship, the precision of the tunnel's path, and the high-grade materials used pointed toward an operation with substantial resources and insider knowledge. This wasn't the work of desperate smugglers digging with shovels in the night. This was engineered, calculated, and purposeful. The chamber's databanks were airlifted to a secure facility, where cybersecurity analysts began dissecting the encrypted files. Early leaks hinted at access logs, cryptographic keys, and even control systems capable of manipulating digital infrastructure at key ports of entry. One system, partially decrypted, appeared to link to traffic control software at a major commercial crossing, raising alarms that the facility may have been built not just for monitoring, but for active sabotage. Meanwhile, boots on the ground uncovered a second, smaller tunnel branching off from the main structure, leading not southward, but toward a civilian water treatment facility several miles away. This raised chilling concerns that the operation had multiple objectives, potentially including attacks on critical infrastructure. The notion that border infiltration might be a distraction from a deeper, more catastrophic agenda took root. Military engineers were called in to collapse the tunnel system and seal off all known access points, but questions lingered. As investigations expanded, more unnerving discoveries surfaced. Embedded within the tunnel's ceiling were motion sensors and cameras capable of recognizing facial features and movement patterns. Analysts feared these were part of a tracking network, perhaps even designed to catalog CBP agents' routines. In essence, someone had turned the U.S. border into a surveillance target, collecting data not for navigation or smuggling, but for detailed intelligence gathering. Perhaps the most frightening realization was how silent the entire operation had been. Despite the high volume of activity involved in constructing such a tunnel, transporting materials, digging equipment, personnel, waste, none of it had raised flags. No local reports of suspicious construction, no satellite anomalies, no intercepted communications. This pointed toward a campaign of remarkable stealth. Either the perpetrators had found a way to bypass every level of border security, or worse, someone on the inside had allowed it to happen. Military presence around the discovery site intensified. Helicopters hovered day and night. High-powered floodlights lit up the once-forgotten landscape. No-fly zones were imposed. All data gathered from the tunnel was classified at the highest level. Not even local authorities were given access to the full scope of what had been found. Whatever this facility was, its discovery wasn't just a breach of border policy. It was a red alert scenario on a national scale. The decision to shut down the California border was not made lightly. It disrupted commerce, separated families, and created chaos across both sides of the boundary. But national security advisors, having reviewed the scope of the find, concluded that allowing traffic to resume risked exposing additional vulnerabilities. If this tunnel had been used for movement, smuggling, or worse, surreptitious extraction or insertion of personnel, the border could no longer be considered secure. Federal agencies began combing satellite archives for signs of other unusual patterns along the border. Heat signatures, vehicle trails, utility spikes, anything that could suggest more underground facilities. Thousands of gigabytes of sensor data were reanalyzed using updated parameters, and artificial intelligence was deployed to assist in pattern recognition. Meanwhile, congressional hearings loomed as lawmakers demanded answers. The existence of such a tunnel also raised serious geopolitical questions. Allies and adversaries alike took notice. intelligence officials scrambled to determine if similar efforts might be underway elsewhere, not just in California, but in Texas, Arizona, and even northern borders like Michigan and New York. What if this wasn't an isolated case? What if it was a pilot program, or worse, a coordinated network? For residents near the border, fear mixed with confusion. Rumors spread fast. Some speculated about terrorism, others about secret military experiments. Fringe theories spiraled into wild speculation. But one thing united them all: the sense that something had shifted fundamentally in how the country viewed its southern border. What had once been a line defined by fences, patrols, and checkpoints now had to be considered in 3 dimensions. Below the surface, literally, a new battlefield had emerged. One that was hidden in the shadows, immune to satellites, resistant to conventional surveillance, and perhaps most troubling of all, capable of staying invisible until it was already too late. Engineers began reassessing the structural integrity of known tunnel-prone zones. Geologists were contracted to create new subterranean maps. Emergency funding was allocated for deep soil seismic sensors and advanced acoustic monitoring systems. It became clear that the old model of border security, focused solely on walls and drones, had been upended. The threat was no longer just what came across the border, it was what moved beneath it. Government officials remained tight-lipped about the full contents of the underground command center, but whispers suggested something even darker might have been uncovered. Encrypted communications hinting at dates, targets, and operations that were still in motion. Whether these were planted as misinformation or represented genuine threats was still under investigation, but the implications were impossible to ignore. As the hours passed and the California border remained sealed, the magnitude of the underground discovery began to take on even darker dimensions. The longer federal agents remained on site, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about one tunnel. This was about architecture, an engineered design with goals far beyond border breach or trafficking. The secondary teams that began mapping the subterranean environment soon realized that the original tunnel was just one part of a sprawling system that branched outward in directions still unexplored. Several offshoot corridors had been carefully concealed behind false paneling and decoy dead ends. Each time one was uncovered, it led deeper underground. These weren't hastily carved escape routes or maintenance shafts. They were sophisticated extensions, each carefully reinforced, each equipped with some form of utility infrastructure. The structure was layered, almost like a subterranean facility segmented into zones. One corridor led to a reinforced storage chamber containing crates marked with obscure serial codes and barcodes that didn't register in any federal system. Inside were rows of sealed equipment, tools, metallic canisters, and sealed black cases that emitted no signals and bore no branding. Their purpose was entirely unknown. Other branches of the tunnel led to rooms that appeared to serve specialized purposes. One was set up as a low-frequency communication hub. Signal interception equipment sat dormant on metal racks, and receivers had been bolted into the bedrock. Based on preliminary analysis, these devices weren't transmitting outward. They were tuned to intercept local signals, potentially listening in on mobile devices, encrypted radio channels, and even law enforcement dispatch systems. Whether the data was being stored, redirected, or manipulated was still being determined. But the implications were alarming. Surveillance wasn't merely visual, it was electronic, cognitive, and silent. Then came the biological traces. A biohazard team was brought in after strange residues were found near a makeshift medical lab located in one of the side tunnels. The room appeared almost surgical in nature. Stainless steel surfaces, clinical lighting, containers filled with preserved samples. It was clear someone had been experimenting with either biological substances or human testing. Sample containers held tissue marked with reference numbers, and one refrigerated chamber contained vials of unknown substances labeled only with chemical shorthand. The lab's presence took the investigation into a completely new realm, one not of smuggling or espionage, but of covert science. Back on the surface, the full scope of the tunnel's reach began to emerge. Analysts discovered that its construction had not disrupted any major utilities, avoided fault lines, and bypassed water tables, all feats requiring advanced geological knowledge. Whoever planned this hadn't just dug. It had been engineered with surgical precision. This indicated access to deep geological maps and perhaps even inside knowledge of land development data, typically reserved for federal contractors and military engineers. The speculation that insiders were involved shifted from possibility to probability. Elsewhere, drone surveillance in adjacent sectors picked up subtle terrain disturbances. Patterns in shrubbery, compacted soil, and heat discrepancies pointed toward the possibility of connected entrances still undiscovered. Several structures within a 10-mile radius were placed under surveillance. Abandoned warehouses, old factories, isolated ranches. Each had the potential to serve as either an access point or operational outpost. The question looming over the intelligence community was no longer who had built the tunnel, but how deeply embedded the operation had become within American soil. From a tactical standpoint, the border closure was now more than just a precaution. It was containment. There were rising concerns about the presence of individuals still operating within the tunnel complex. Motion sensors set in newly discovered branches occasionally picked up activity, but no arrests were made. It became apparent that whoever had constructed this had evacuation protocols in place. Some corridors bore signs of hasty retreat, personal belongings left behind, evidence of digital erasure from terminals, and in some rooms, signs of documents being incinerated. But in others, operations looked like they'd been suspended intentionally, as if waiting for a time to resume. Above ground, a different kind of tension was growing. Public officials began to field increasingly urgent questions from media and international observers. California's governor had been briefed, as had the Department of Defense and key international allies. The shutdown wasn't just a disruption anymore, it was becoming a geopolitical chess piece. Border closures ripple into trade negotiations, national security discussions, and military readiness postures. The State Department began coordinating with foreign embassies, unsure whether this discovery had international ties. What made the situation even more precarious was the scope of what wasn't known. No name had been attached to the operation, no claims of responsibility, no ideological markings, no flags, no manifestos. It was a ghost, an operation hidden in plain sight, moving with such calculated precision that it had evaded all conventional forms of detection. Intelligence agencies raced to compare similar findings in other parts of the world. Some analysts drew parallels with Cold War-era listening posts. Others likened it to insurgency tunnel networks seen in the Middle East, but none of those comparisons fully fit. Special operations units were rotated in for shifts in tunnel reconnaissance, equipped with exosuits and autonomous mapping drones. The psychological toll on these units began to emerge as reports filtered back of long, narrow corridors stretching farther than the maps suggested, of equipment malfunctioning in specific zones, and of unexplained environmental anomalies. Sections where electromagnetic interference disrupted communications and caused navigation equipment to fail. Whether this was due to natural conditions or deliberate design, no one could yet say. While underground units dealt with the enigma of the tunnels themselves, cyber teams were racing to decode the digital cache recovered from the command center. The encryption was multi-layered and resistant to even quantum-assisted analysis. But among the few deciphered packets were route diagrams, schedules, and what appeared to be shift rotations. This added new weight to the theory that the facility had been manned in organized shifts, possibly for months. If the data was accurate, as many as 40 individuals had been part of the operational team at its height. Attention turned next to supply chains. How had materials for such a massive construction been transported without notice? Trucks? Rail? Drones? Investigators began poring over shipping records looking for any anomalies. The use of recycled materials disguised as standard shipments emerged as a leading theory. Anomalous deliveries to shell corporations in the region were discovered. Businesses that existed only on paper but had ordered tons of concrete, wiring, ventilation equipment, and specialized drilling tools. It painted a picture of an invisible logistical operation, one that had relied on digital shadows and bureaucratic camouflage. One of the most unsettling discoveries came not from within the tunnel itself, but from a nearby reservoir. Environmental sensors installed there, long thought to be obsolete, began transmitting unusual chemical readings. The patterns matched the residue found in the underground medical lab. This discovery suggested not only local experimentation, but possible environmental contamination. Whether intentional or accidental, the implications were dire. Federal environmental protection teams were dispatched immediately, and the entire region was placed under discreet ecological surveillance. The risk wasn't just security anymore, it might be biohazardous. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What are your thoughts on the California border shutdown? What do you think happens next? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.